So I announced today that in light of the crazy gerrymander that the legislature put in place that draws a completely new, unrecognizable district, I think my efforts to do what I came into this race to do, to promote civility, to bring goodness back to politics, to try to end some of the partisanship, I think I can channel those efforts in other ways, but this race is so, the district is now so unrecognizable to what it was that I think it made sense for me to pull out. And not for nothing, I was drawn out of the district in this final version of the map like I was in every version of the map before it.
So you would have had to relocate into the district had you won. You still could have run.
Yes, but the communities that I've been talking to for the past year, a lot of them aren't in the district anymore. A whole bunch of communities I'd never interacted with, engaged with over the course of this campaign were there, and the district explicitly was designed to be hard or unwinnable for Democrats. That was the purpose of the design. And so if there's things I can do to support candidates, support institutions who share a lot of the values, want to bring civility back to politics, I think that's where my energy is better spent right now.
Can a Democrat win Missouri's 2nd congressional district?
I think it's going to be challenging this time around, and I'm going to do what I can to make sure that Democrats are winning here. And I'm going to be working with candidates everywhere.
Which one?
I will sort of see how things play out in the race, but I'm likely to vote for Trish Gunby, who I think has good salient experience from her time in the state legislature.
How do you evaluate Ann Wagner's time in Congress?
It's hard for me to know what she stands for, what she wants to do, what she wants to accomplish. She's been around for 10 years now, and even people who have voted for her, who like her, it's very hard to find someone who can name concretely anything that she has done to help people in the region. And that's part of the reason I got into this in the first place, is people here are not well represented in U.S. Congress. She has one issue that she keeps coming back to, which is her work with child sex trafficking, and yet she now has a colleague in Congress who is very credibly accused of child sex trafficking, and she hasn't said anything about it. So she just loses a lot of credibility on the one thing where she's really planted her flag, but I can't really name anything she's done. She just goes with the partisan wins.
Do you see at all the politics, with the leaked draft of the Supreme Court decision and now this tragedy in Texas,
Yeah.
Are the issues changing?
I hope so. I think that the tragedy in Texas, the fact that we keep having this conversation over and over is horrifying. And I've gone to a lot of high schools to speak with students and high school Democratic clubs and ask what issues matter most to people who are in high school. And time and again, gun violence comes up. Kids in high school today have to do active shooter drills. That's not a thing I had to deal with when I was in high school. And no one should have to go to school in fear, and I hope we're able to at least move things forward in a little bit in the right direction, but it feels like we keep having this conversation over and over again, and it's really horrifying.
Statewide, Missouri, especially Missouri Republicans who win those races, seem to feel pretty confident that voters in the whole state don't want to see any gun restrictions, any gun safety proposals at all. But in the 2nd district, as it's newly constructed, what do you think is a reasonable policy that voters there would say, you know what, I can support that?
Yeah, the policies that we had been talking about, which is keeping guns out of the hands of violent criminals, supporting background checks for weapons of war, keeping guns out of the hands of domestic abusers. Democrats and Republicans across the board broadly agree with that. There's data that says something like 90% of Americans think background checks for assault rifles make sense, and I'm certainly one of them. And the fact that we're not able to push through legislation that 90% of Americans agree on points to just how divided the political system is and how much more work we have to do.
Those background checks are required by federal law now if you're a dealer.
Yes. And there's loopholes in there that make it easy to circumvent those rules, and we have to try to close those loopholes. People talk about the gun show loophole, which basically means that at certain gun shows, you can buy these weapons without subjecting yourself to the same background checks. Those are simple, common sense things we got to try to change.
Is there anything that you need to see or still have yet to see from Trish Gunby that would earn your full endorsement? You sort of endorsed her now, saying you might vote for her.
Yeah, I mean, I think as things stand right now, I'd be inclined to vote for her in this election, but we'll see how things play out. And like I said, my efforts are going to be focused on electing good people and Democrats in the region, elsewhere in the state, because I think we need to do more to bring civility back to politics. And I also think we need to do more to communicate with people who don't feel like the Democratic Party is doing much to reach out to them or represent them. So we've got to be spending more time in rural areas, we've got to be spending more time in exurban areas, and we've got to try to demonstrate that as candidates, as a party, and as a former candidate now, we share your values. We might not always disagree, we might not always agree on the policies, but we do share your values.
Pardon the connotation. I read an article this morning, I think, that referred to you as a nerd.
You wouldn't be the first person to call me a nerd.
Wasn't my word, but I want you to nerd out with me for a moment if you can. You looked at the data in the map. You looked at likelihoods. You looked at I'm sure much of the voter data and the analysis there. What did you see in this newly drawn district? What is it in the data that gives you pause?
So a couple of things. Again, the fact that I was drawn out of the final version of the district, as I had been in every other version. Taking that aside, this is a district that in 2020 was the closest district in the country at the presidential level. Trump won the district only by about 115 votes out of 750,000 people or so who live in the district. And now they've taken that and made it a district that Trump would have won by 8%. And it was done explicitly with the purpose of making it less competitive and less representative. So they've turned it into a district that before was by and large pretty suburban, and now is a little bit urban, a little bit suburban, and a little bit rural. So all three sets of communities are kind of underrepresented in the new version of the district. There was really no attention paid to that. It was all about how do you goose the numbers and make it a more Republican-leaning district and pack as many partisan voters in there as you can.
Is it compact and contiguous?
No, I've said that before. I think the districts that really aren't compact and contiguous are the first and the third district. So the first district is the city of St. Louis, and the third is the now big Pac-Man looking district that covers a lot of this part of the state. And this compact and contiguous question is pertinent because the Missouri Constitution requires that congressional districts be compact and contiguous. And so we're continuing to explore legal options so that Missourians have their constitutional rights protected, but because we're so close to an election now, that's not going to change anything this time around.
Look, there are certainly civic-minded folks who are very politically engaged, who understand and look at maps and gerrymandering, and they get it.
Yep.
But those people are like 1% of the population.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of folks just don't care.
Yeah.
They're like, I gotta put food on the table. I gotta keep my job.
Yeah.
I gotta look at the news and worry about what's going on in Texas. I don't have time for all this. So for those folks,
yeah,
why the heck should they care about the squiggly lines on a map?
People, the reason that gerrymandering matters, the reason that it affects people, is because we're setting up systems that only make it possible to elect the most extreme politicians on the far right and on the far left. And most people are pretty down the middle, one way or another. They might lean a little left, they might lean a little right, but they're pretty down the middle sorts of voters. And when you get those extreme cases, extreme right or extreme left, it makes it harder to compromise. And so I think you're right that what matters most to people right now is affordability, public safety, and now gun violence is such a big issue as it should be, reproductive health and healthcare access more generally. But when you've only got the extreme partisans who are getting elected everywhere in the country, not just in Missouri, it makes it much harder for those people to compromise. And we need people who are able to do that.
I fully understand this next comparison is apples and oranges.
Yep.
But it does strike me a little bit odd that last night in Chesterfield, Eric Greitens screened a movie saying that the election in 2020 was rigged.
Mm-hmm.
And here you are sitting here telling me that the election in 2022, or at least the compilation of voters that will participate in it, is rigged.
So I want to be very clear. I'm not saying the election is rigged.
But the processes, the system, the way that voters stack up in congressional districts.
I think the districts are being drawn in ways that are designed to bring about certain outcomes. And that doesn't seem like the fairest way to go about doing this. And I think there are fairer, better ways to do it that we're seeing in other parts of the country, and that's not happening here.
I asked a shopper in the grocery store parking lot out in St. Charles County about this gerrymandering thing.
Yep.
And I don't know that he was all that politically engaged on a day-to-day from his own confession, but he did say, well, that's kind of like using a cheat code in a video game.
I like that metaphor a lot. It is, right? You can still win without a cheat code, and you can still lose even if you're using the cheat code, I guess, but it certainly makes it a whole lot harder.
Was this a case of picking your battles in bowing out?
I think, like I said, I think my efforts are better spent right now helping out in other ways that aren't on the ballot. So yes, I guess is the answer to your question.
Maybe a crude question, but did gender politics play any factor in the matchup that you would have had in a general election?
That's not something I thought about. I'm running because I think I do a good job representing the district, and that's true across the board.
Understand. Trish Gunby, what is the road ahead for her? What is if there is a winning message, if there is a slim lane to her pulling off what would now be an upset by your analysis? What's the path? What's the playbook?
I think the things we need to be talking about, not just in this new 2nd district, and not just in Missouri, but everywhere in the country where Democrats are falling behind, is the things that Democrats and Republicans share as issues and as values. We need to be talking about affordability. We need to be talking about healthcare access. We need to be talking about job growth and the fact that we're losing population in large parts of the state, particularly out in the rural areas. We need to be talking about the things that matter to people on a day-to-day basis and not get caught in the horse race of which state legislator benefits from one squiggly line on the congressional map versus another. We have to be talking about things that matter to people, and we have to be going out to communities where Democrats aren't winning. If we can find the areas where Democrats are losing 80-20, and start talking to people and get people to recognize, I might not vote for a Democrat this time, but this one seems reasonable, or this group of people seems reasonable. That's how you start picking away at it and how you start ending the partisan divide.
How do you, or can you, compete with the culture wars?
What do you mean exactly by that?
I don't think I'd be the first political reporter or person to look at the scene of recent events since 2016 or so and say that there's a heavy infusion of entertainment culture in politics, and that Republicans have used this effectively to sort of change the rules of engagement a little bit. Do you just not have that fight, or do you?
I think people are still looking for good people to run for elected office, and I think there has been a lot of fear infused into politics, and I do think we need to push back against that, but we push back against that by being present, showing up, and having face-to-face conversations that aren't just online or aren't just people screaming at each other. It is hard to hate someone you have sat down with face-to-face and had a conversation with, right? You might not agree with them, but you're not going to hate them. And the fact that Democrats for a generation now haven't been spending time in rural areas is a big part of the issue here.
Hate's a strong word. Have Republicans weaponized hate in politics?
I think there's people on the extremes on both ends who have weaponized hate in politics. I certainly think there's a whole lot of examples of Republican politicians in Missouri doing just that.
Yeah. Ben, I enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah.
I wish it was on different terms for you, but understand, and thanks for doing the debrief. Oftentimes, it's the other way around. They close up shop in the campaign, and we never hear from them again. So.
Yeah. No, and I just, I'm doing this because the system needs fixing, right? Right now, the system is designed in a way where people's voices aren't being represented in the way that they should, and I want to demonstrate that I'm fighting for that. I want to draw attention to it because it's why we're dealing with so much extremism in politics, and I want to demonstrate that I'm going to be here fighting for that, even if I'm not on the ballot this time around.
Devil's advocate, do you have you're surrendering your platform. Couldn't you have used the campaign to make that case through August 2nd at least?
I think there's other ways that I can be doing that and working with other candidates rather than trying to you could quickly retool in a district that's unrecognizable to what it was before because the ground rules changed.
So the next job for you is?
Figuring that out, but it will be around here helping out people and trying to move the ball forward on a lot of these important issues.
Advisor, consultant, activist?
Truly don't, I don't know what title yet, don't know exactly what it'll look like, but it will be working on a lot of these issues one way or another.